When the U.S. first started getting involved, so in the early 20th century, there was a real push by our international partners, international countries from around the world, to get the U.S. involved in drug control. And the U.S. saw it also as a way to open up diplomatic channels, as a way to have influence in other countries. Certainly, in America in the early 20th century, American influence was a really important aspect of foreign policy and spreading American ideals around the world. That was very popular, of course, until the isolationist movement. But before the isolationists came in, that was popular. And so there was a push. There were different ambassadors sent to talk about drugs. When the United Nations was formed, one of the first things, one of the items on the agenda, obviously, in addition to security and making sure another world war didn't happen, was to deal with the drug problem. And so this culminated into three international drug treaties that were, it passed in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, 61, 71, and 88. And these were, remain today the international cooperation, the international agreements that the U.S. has been a signatory to, and almost every country in the world has done. This has really given the U.S. permission to look at what other countries are doing, because for a long time, we were not producing most of the marijuana like we are now in the U.S. We don't grow coca leaves in the United States. We don't process cocaine. We don't do that. Although we do take processed cocaine and create crack here, because that's a very easy process. But we don't grow opium poppies. We're not a main supplier of opium, but we are a main supplier of methamphetamine, because that's a synthetic stimulant that can be made without growing, plants necessarily. So the U.S. has played a role both in supply and demand within our own country, but we've also looked to other countries to reduce their source of these drugs. And so the U.S. has, of course, participated in aerial spraying and source country control in different ways. Obviously, the DEA has become more of an international bureau than it is only domestic. It's really both domestic and international. And we have had a big part lately in what we call alternative development, basically in incentivizing farmers to grow other things, whether they be coffee or other kinds of crops that are sustainable and not having the damage that, say, opium poppy does when you process that into heroin. And certainly the synthetic fentanyl that's now, much more strong, much stronger than heroin, of course, is produced mainly in China and India in clandestine labs. These are huge threats to the United States. They're threats to the global order, I think. And, the U.S. has an interest and incentive to try and reduce those things. That has always been something that's been top of mind, I think, for American foreign drug policy.